Joining us right now, Khristal Thomas is a contributing writer for The Plug, and she's the author of a recent investigative article titled Implications of Digital Contact Tracing for Black and Brown Communities. Khristal, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here
Uh, this,
today.
I'm excited to have you on here. This is an important conversation. Your piece is fantastic. It really reveals a lot. But for everybody who's watching here right now, just to give kind of a little bit of context, contact tracing has been put forth as a method that could help curtail the transmission of COVID-19. But
Mhm.
how are these systems being put in place currently, and how could this impact individual privacy?
So currently, there are two technological frameworks that are currently being utilized throughout the globe. The first one is the use of exposure notification applications, which utilizes an underlying technology that was developed by Google and Apple, basically utilizing this Bluetooth exchange system that will notify users that they have come in close contact with the individual who's tested positive for COVID-19. The other is a geolocation-based application. But the most utilized application that is going to be widespread throughout the United States and across the globe is exposure notification applications. And what actually occurs with this system is that it basically keeps privacy in mind, and that it is a decentralized repository where the information will be stored locally on the individual's phone, not in a centralized repository, and it'll be anonymized data that will be collected and aggregated to give a full picture spectrum for public health authorities.
So going from that and talking about this anonymized data, I guess if it is anonymized, are there still data privacy concerns that go along with this? And more importantly, I guess to get into some of the context of your article, how is this affecting Black and Brown communities?
Well, the bigger idea around this is that we're really looking at the privacy of individuals and communities of color when it comes to their overall aggregation, specifically in the context of protesting police brutality, right? How is this information being collected? Who has access to this information? And then what uses will it have? And will this information be sunsetted at some point? So when it comes to Black and Brown communities, we are seeing massive swaths of people taking to the streets, protesting against police brutality and fighting for racial equity. And the underlying thing is, how can this technology, when it comes to disadvantaged communities who are disproportionately overlooked by the technology, can also be unduly targeted by it? How this technology could be a new form of mass surveillance, in particular, looking at protesters and really surveilling them and being able to identify them. Otherwise, they will be anonymous in a large crowd and potentially retaliating against them in some way, subjecting them to additional unfounded investigations.
Which seems to be a consistent kind of nightmare scenario for a lot of people who are going out to the protests. Looking at this, I guess in a global context where maybe some of this tracing's been involved a little bit more, have there been examples of this or other ways that this kind of technology has been utilized to track people?
Absolutely. We've already seen it really play out more so the Gulf states. In particular, one country that's top of mind for me is Bahrain. Bahrain has utilized contact information from their digital contact tracing application, and it has been linked to a national television show where they offered prizes to individuals who stayed home during Ramadan. And this is one particular uses of this invasive application, and how it can be utilized to collect swaths of information that would otherwise not be available had the technology not been implemented in the first place. So a serious risk for protesters is that government might use this surveillance, this disease surveillance technology to identify demonstrators, and also, selectively single them out for enforcement matters that are completely unrelated to what the technology intended use was originally for.
Looking at this, and how this is being implemented now currently as we see more of these roll out, what are some ways to fight against this? Are there some policies that could help, that could be enacted, or what can people do? What did you find out through this?
What I found out through this is that there are currently three real proposals that have been introduced at the federal level for the enforcement and use of contact tracing applications. One that is top of mind for me that I'm tracking is Exposure Notification Privacy Act. It was introduced by Senator Cantwell and one of her Republican colleagues And basically what it does is implement regulations for the use of exposure notification apps. Some of the provisions include, but are not limited to, transparency. So making sure that the people who are adopting this technology know what the technology is going to be used for, who has access to this information, and where the information will also be stored. Another important provision is that it requires voluntary adoption. And what we do know is that in order for this technology to even work, you're going to need about a 60% adoption rate from the population. Also, providing a notice of covered data practices is also something essential. And also having access limitations for law enforcement is another important provision. Having those proper data restrictions in place for who can utilize this information and who cannot, to be able to proactively prohibit the invasive practices that could come into place with the use of this technology.
With these different proposals out there, is there hope that any of them will get passed? Or is there any kind of movement on that end?
I would have to say we've been seeing a little bit of a stalemate when it comes to privacy legislation in the federal perspective at large. They've been percolating different privacy legislation since last year, right? So the possibility of this getting passed at the federal level is kind of at a standstill, I would have to say. But this is where states can come in and do more of the work, right? They are the ones that have the proper authorities over these applications and are working with the private sector to implement these practices. So it will be up to the states to really outline guidelines and practices that are in place, and really thinking about not the erosion of civil liberties that can come with these invasive technologies.
It's such an important conversation to have, and I want to thank you too for your article. I want to remind everybody again. So it's implications of digital contact tracing for Black and Brown communities. Such an important thing to discuss and know about. And thank you for doing this investigation into this and helping to bring this to light. And we really appreciate you being here on Digital Trends Live, Khristal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.